The Shearwater NERD2 dive computer, a handy little near-eye computer which is being marketed as giving you the ultimate freedom. Now, I did a video recently about how the NERD2 actually handles in the field, and I had some different situations which I put it in. The link for that is above. But I'd actually like to come to reviewing the NERD2 now, and ultimately asking the question, is it something I can recommend to you as a diver, and more specifically for the purpose of this channel, is it something that I can recommend to you, our GUE dive community? So let's start with the basics of this computer. First of all, it is adaptable for both open circuit and to closed circuit rebreathers. This particular mount that I've got here is the open circuit. Your hose essentially goes right through there. Now, you don't need to take apart your regulator. There's a handy little screw here. Don't know if you can see that there, which you unscrew it, that clips out, and then this clips around your hose and you screw it tight. Now, my biggest concern when I was diving with this in Mexico was once the hose is through, so once it's hooked on like that, are two things. First of all, is it going to be constantly moving up and down the hose? Now, what I'm really happy to say on that front is yes, is no, and sort of. Now, the sort of is more down to my lack of familiarity with the hardware. Now, first off, in terms of moving up and down the hose, it does not do that. Once this screw is locked, it stays locked. So it's really, really well engineered. There's a part of me that would have liked to have maybe seen this hinge here built of metal instead of plastic, but it's a very, very durable plastic. This is not a cheap piece of kit. Now, in terms of when I said sort of, that's because the NERD2, as you can see here, also rotates. Now, this again, as I said, is a lack of familiarity on my part, because the first time I dived with it, I was trying to find the optimum position for the NERD2. However, once said position had been found, it didn't move. Now, the second concern I had when diving with the NERD2 was, is that which it's selling itself as actually going to be invasive? In other words, is the fact that it's a near-eye computer going to get in the way of actually me looking in front of me? And that, I'm happy to say, is an absolute no, because the way that the NERD2 sits on your system, it's not in front of your eye like that. It doesn't sit there. That would indeed be invasive. What it does is it sits right below your eye. Right on the hose here below your eye. So it's never in front of you, it's just below you. So to actually read the screen, you just look down. The screen is the next part I'd like to talk about. It's incredibly, incredibly clear. Now, it does need to be relatively close. You don't lose sight of it, obviously, because it's going to be right here on your hose. It is a 2-button system. You turn it on with 2 fingers, and then the left side, so let me do it from your angle, the left side is essentially the mode, it scrolls through the different modes, and the right side selects said mode, and then it goes through the next layer. So once you're in the mode you've selected, within that mode you'll have different subsettings. You cycle through the subsettings with the left, and you select that subsetting on the right. Let's say you wanted to change one of your gases, it would be the same thing. There would be essentially a highlighter that moves from one number to the next with the left, and then you change it with the right. So it can be a bit less direct than doing it on a wrist computer, but considering what it is, which is a near-eye computer, the fact that you're able to do such things is quite astonishing. And I do say again, I brought this up in the previous video, the brightness of this screen, considering how small it is quite incredible. And I cannot stress this point enough, I go back to it, it never felt invasive. In fact, it very much felt like it became part of my equipment. Now, for such a small computer, the other thing I'd like to talk about is the various modes you get on this computer. Much like with the Teric, you've got your open circuit recreational mode, you've got your open circuit technical mode. It is also closed circuit ready, and it also has a gauge mode, and it can also be, I don't think though it can be used as a freediving computer for obvious reasons. You wouldn't be holding that as a freediving computer. Now, You do have a number of various gas options. You've got your standard air. The oxygen can be set, like on the Terek, all the way up to 99%. So it is enriched air ready. This computer is also trimix usable. So for those of technical divers, decompression divers, or for those closed circuit divers amongst you, this thing does work. And as I said, for the closed circuit divers, this mount is obviously not the closed circuit mount. There is a completely alternative closed circuit mount. And for the cave divers amongst you, there is also a really handy tool whereby if it's not something I've seen personally, but it is in the promotional videos that's on Shearwater's website. The cavern divers or the cave divers who have helmets, so the ones who are going through spelunking in the really tight environments and wearing a cavern helmet. There's an extra attachment on a kind of, not a hose, but it's almost like one of those strobe light arms. So let's call it a flexible arm. So there's a flexible arm which the nerd can clip onto, and it fits right in front of your eye there. So it's slightly different angle, but just above. So in terms of what the computer delivers for its size, it has all the essential modes that you would need as both a recreational and a technical diver. It's bright, it's easy to use, although a bit slow to use compared to another dive computer, based on the fact that it has a limitation of just being a 2-button system. So where do the negatives necessarily come in? There are a few, and one of them is very relevant to us specifically as GUE divers. Now this is something I said at the end of the video where I was mentioning how these things handled in the field, and I finished off with a question saying, I know a lot of you are going to be asking, well, how in God's good earth could you possibly have a dive computer that sits on your second stage hose, and then your buddy has an out of gas emergency? Because then essentially what you're doing is you're putting your head down and you're donating your hose, and in doing so you are losing access to your dive computer. Yes. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of a spoiler here. For that very reason, I, as a GUE diver, would not ever use this as my primary computer. However, I do encourage you to go and watch that other video, because I mentioned a number of various scenarios, most notably in relation to cave diving, cavern diving, and specifically doing underwater photography, where this little thing comes into its own, because you've got so many various other things to think about when you're setting up an underwater shot. Also, if you were filming underwater with various lights in a cave, you've got so many different pieces of equipment to manage, and if you've got a double rig camera with a torch in your hand, it's very difficult to then, you know, turn your wrist to get that. And believe me, this sounds silly, but I've just been there doing it. And when I had the Halcyon Focus 2.0 in my left hand, and I had my camera, which is quite a substantial size, in both hands, believe me, the last thing I wanted to be doing was twisting my wrist. Having this computer here, there are a number of very applicable scenarios where it works. So the question is, can I wholeheartedly recommend this computer to you GUE divers, or even to you divers out there? Yes and no. Yes, because it does everything that the other dive computers do. It has the technical features, it's good for closed circuit rebreather compatible, it's got various gas settings, it's easy to use, it even has a digital compass, which I forgot to mention before, a 3-axis digital compass, and I tested it out. It's highly accurate. So why would I say no? 2 reasons come to mind. First being, if you are going to even consider using this as a primary computer, you then can't dive on a GUE setup, which means this becomes redundant to us. Because effectively, if you're ever in an out of gas situation, as I said, and you have to share your air, if this is the only computer you have, you've just effectively lost your computer. So I would use it, but not as a primary computer. I wouldn't. It's so small and it's so easy to use and it's so compact and it's so user friendly that I certainly don't think there's any harm with having it as a backup computer, especially so for the scenarios which I mentioned, such as photography and cavern diving, which are in the other video, the link to that which I said is above. Now, the other thing which I would say maybe is a negative, although the buttons on this are substantially larger than the buttons on the Shearwater Terek, for the technical divers among you who are wearing dry suits and who are wearing large heavy duty gloves, this is only a theory because I haven't tested it myself. I would imagine that the buttons may be a bit on the tricky side to use, especially when, although granted, all the setting up you would do before you get in the dive, before you have your gloves on anyway. But when you're underwater, the actual usage of it may be a bit cumbersome with the gloves. However, if you look at this little extract from Shearwater's promotional video, there's very clearly a technical diver here there's very clearly a diver here with heavy duty gloves on using it. So as I said, it's just a theory, but the promotional material would seem to suggest otherwise. So as I said, it's something that I have completely fallen in love with. This has now become part of my dive equipment setup, although I will maintain it's not a computer based on the way that we dive with the long hose that goes around our neck and the alternate gas source which we keep on the bungee around our neck. This could under no circumstance be, for a GUE diver, a primary dive computer. If you're not a GUE diver, then yes, that's certainly, and you're on a non-GUE standardized equipment setup, then yes, absolutely go for this. This is amazing. If you are a GUE diver, which I imagine you are if you're on the channel, I would say this is one of the best backup computers you could ever think of. And I guess the counter arguments are, if you're in and out, if your body's in and out of gas situation, although, yeah, you don't want to not have a computer, the argument would obviously be that the dive is pretty much going to be ending most likely anyway. So, still have your other computer, have a Terek, have whatever dive computer you've got, but don't use this as a primary if you're on a GUE setup. That said, I love this little thing, and it's now part of my dive equipment setup. So there we go, guys. There is my honest, humble review of the Shearwater NERD2, which it's a yes and a no for all the reasons I just said. I would love to know what you guys think of it. At first glance, is this something that you like the look of? Is the Shearwater NERD2 a dive computer you have used? And if so, what did you think about it? Please, as always, leave your thoughts and your comments down below. And please give this video a thumbs up. Hit the subscribe button and tickle the notification bell so you know whenever we've got a new video coming out on the channel. My name is Nico Lurot, and I'll see you guys next time on the Global Underwater Explorers YouTube channel. See ya!